It's a Wednesday edition of Orange and Blue today. Cecil Lammy, Andrew Mason, and not joining us, Mace, but Mel Kiper. You got to talk to him today on a conference call. How cool is that, man?
Oh, it's cool. I mean, this is the time of year where the national draft prognosticators do conference calls with us media types. And some of them, you're going to get your question in. Some of them you're not quite sure. Mel Kiper Jr. usually is last an hour, and you're not quite sure if he's going to get to all of them or not. But today, got to all of them, which meant we were able to get the Denver question. And see, the other thing about these is, he's going to get to the questions dealing with teams at the top of the draft. But when you get to teams later on in the first round, whoever's moderating the conference calls, they don't prioritize Denver, the Chargers, the Chiefs, the playoff teams. They don't prioritize them as highly, so you don't know. But we were able to get some good stuff. We're going to talk about some of it today. We're going to talk about some of it tomorrow because it plays a little bit off of what he talked about yesterday when he mocked McMillan of the Broncos at 20, but he was very clear in saying that he could have done Omarion Hampton, and he had Omarion Hampton mocked to the Dallas Cowboys at 12, but said he could have done that either way. He could have said, I could have had, Teteroa McMillan going to the Cowboys at number 12 and Omarion Hampton at 20. And I want to get started with a clip where he talked about how if he were the Cowboys, he might actually be more inclined to pick Teteroa McMillan, but this sort of applies to the Broncos because of the relative scarcity of wide receivers in this year's class compared to the surplus of running backs. Take a listen to Mel Kiper Jr. on all that.
This is a running back class. It's, I think, the deepest position in the draft. I have 31 running backs, I believe, right now with draftable grades. So you can find guys. I love LaQuint Allen from Syracuse, Dylan Sampson from Tennessee. You get running backs down the line. Kyle Monangai, Rutgers may last to the late rounds. So, there's going to be running backs that they may like and figure out we can wait a little bit on the running back, take the wide out, because the wide receiver position is not as good as running back. I'm close. It's not what the wide receiver position has been. So maybe take T-Mac there and wait on the running back.
A lot of teams are going to have that debate, Mace, of like, okay, we love these running backs, but we love more than one of these running backs.
Yes. The question then becomes, though, you love the running backs, but what are you trying to get out of this draft? I think this is where it really gets interesting. Are you viewing this as a chance to get a final piece, or are you viewing it as part of a larger puzzle? And that's why the Broncos and where they stand in their building process is so interesting, and where you think they are in terms of their process. And maybe George Payton and Sean Payton deep down have two different opinions about where the Broncos stand in their building process.
Yeah, and I could see Sean being a more accelerated approach and George being more of a like, we're not yet there, although we're getting closer because you have the quarterback. For me, if they have J.K. Dobbins, then it's a piece of the puzzle. If they don't, you need the best damn starter running back you can right as soon as you can in the draft.
And are you willing to trade up for that?
Yes. I'm talking Arizona, Atlanta, 15, 16, somewhere in that range.
So trade up, but not sacrifice next year's one.
Right. Next year's 2 is fine. Next year's draft isn't great, but moving up, securing Omarion Hampton, if he's there, Cowboys could change things. Although they've got 2 free agent backs, like they could change some things. Still there at 12, and of course 6 just seems like Ashton Ginty right now.
What about this year's 2 to move up?
I guess I'd be like George. Like I'd be pretty hesitant on exchanging any of this year's picks.
Yeah. So not this year's 2, not this year's 3.
No, maybe this year's 6 because they have 3 of them. So,
you may not even be able to move up one pick for this year's 6th. I mean, at that point, you're basically saying I'm staying at 20.
Right.
If you're saying, oh, I'll give up a 6, you're saying you're basically saying I'm good at 20, or you're going to move down.
Yeah,
you're going to get more darts.
Options. And speaking of more darts, I'd like more backs. Honestly, if they don't get a free agent running back, let's just say it's J.K. Dobbins. I'm fine with 2 backs in this draft. And he mentioned some guys, Mace, that we really haven't broke down, and I think the people need to hear, because it's kind of a smorgasbord, buffet, smorgasbord. Which do you prefer?
Buffet is the more common term. Smorgasbord is more fun.
Okay. Wasn't this draft fun, right?
Yes. Smorgasbord is more syllables. I mean, it's also a fun word. It's like to describe the newest Bronco, Matt Hawk, the punter that they signed today. I described him as a peripatetic punter because he has punted for 4 different teams in the last 4 seasons. And yes, that's not a good sign, okay? You're not getting a punter here who is exactly at the top of the deck. But, there's a reason why we're not leading with punter, why we're leading with running back. It's because as much as I like to talk about punters, punter does not move the YouTube algorithm, unfortunately. So that's why we're not talking very much about that. But smorgasbord is a fun word. So let's do that. But, George Payton said last month, hey, there's something for everybody, right? Yep. And so, Mel Kiper Jr. mentioned a couple of names there, and he went back to those names when I asked him specifically later about Kamara type of backs, because we're going to get into some more of these comments, because we don't want to use them all in one day here, because this could be just the Mel Kiper Jr. show, and we want it to be our show. So I don't think people are watching this just to hear us run a bunch of Kiper sound bites, with all respect to Mel. So we're going to space those out a little bit. But he talked about Omarion Hampton. He talked about Ashton Genty. We're going to dive into that in a bit. But because he had talked about those guys, when I got my crack at Kiper, and he talked about Teteroa McMillan as well, who he had mocked to the Broncos. So because of that, I wanted to ask him something different. And so I asked him about day 2 backs that were in the Kamara type. So, the quote unquote Joker running back. And we've talked about Joker tight ends. We talked about Evan Engram. The Joker running back is harder to find than the Joker tight end, but it doesn't mean they're not looking. We know that when they interviewed Brashard Smith from SMU, that they very much said, okay, when they talked about his role, it was, okay, catch pass out of the backfield. The interview basically focused on Joker based on what Brashard Smith shared with me when I asked him about it. So that's part of why I asked Mel Kiper Jr., okay, Kamara type of running backs who could be available on day 2. And here's Mel Kiper Jr. getting into those types of running backs.
Yeah, exactly. The Alvin Kamara, who's a 3rd-round pick, coming out of the high school, of the collegiate ranks after, just a heck of a career. He's been bounced around from 2 different schools. Dylan Sampson from Tennessee, I think, is a guy to look at there. I'm a LaQuint Allen guy at Syracuse. To me, the way he played this year was as exciting to watch as anybody playing college football. The way he smelled the goal line, the way he moved him outside, he caught passes. Could be a wide receiver, I believe, in the NFL as well. Ran hard. People say, well, the long speed's a question mark, but I think he's an interesting guy. I think LaQuint Allen from Syracuse, like I said, Dylan Sampson, Tennessee, R.J. Harvey at UCF. I think Cam Scatteraboo can be a guy you look at in the 3rd or 4th round area as well. The running back position is really deep. Find your guy. I think there's going to be, like I said, I got 31 with draftable grades. And some of these guys I mentioned, even Caleb Johnson from Iowa, after running in the 4, 5, 7 range, could drop just a bit. Some people are talking about him I'm talking about in the league that I had conversations. It could go maybe sneak into the late first, early second. Maybe he drops down just a bit. So after Ginty and Hampton, and the Judkins and Henderson, the 2 Ohio State kids, are also in that mix. ETN from Georgia. So there's like I said, there's a lot of running backs. They're going to go anywhere between the 2nd and 5th round.
LeQuint Allen, just to kind of throw a number at you, because there's always a number that can explain. 64 catches last year.
Love it. Love it. My pro comp for LeQuint is shades of James Cook. I don't like doing one-for-one comparisons. But if I tell Broncos fans, and yeah, maybe people aren't watching Syracuse football, but if I say LeQuint Allen is like a James Cook, I think that's going to get a lot of attention and it'll get people excited. I just love cracking up because Mel, he's so beside himself because he mentioned like 8 backs there. And yes, Scattaboo was in there for the chat room who's son, Sam Scattaboo. But LeQuint Allen, a player that we need to talk a little bit more about, because if Mel thinks he could play wide receiver, we know how much they covet a Blake Watson, a converted receiver himself, guy that can run routes, guy that only he and Bucky Irving had 50-plus catches 2 years ago in college football. So LeQuint Allen, let's put that one on our pegboard for the Broncos.
And of course, Brashard Smith, a converted wide receiver as well.
Yes.
So LeQuint Allen, converted receiver, somebody that Mel Kiper Jr. thinks can make sense, and certainly had the goods as a pass catcher last year. But he also talked about his nose for the goal line. 16 touchdowns on the ground last year, not catching passes. 16 rushing touchdowns, and then another 4 through the air for Syracuse last year. And he's a 6 foot, 204 pounds. Dylan Sampson. The Kamara comparisons are interesting. He's but he's a little bit smaller. He's 5'8", 200 pounds. So, he's got some thickness to his build as well. But Sampson is not as proven as a pass catcher. It wasn't something that Tennessee used him in as extensively as LeQuint Allen was used in at Syracuse the last couple of years. He only had 40 catches his entire career in college. So fewer receptions for Dylan Sampson in his college career than LeQuint Allen had just this past season. But we know how explosive he is as a runner as well, with nearly 6 yards a carry. And another guy who's got a great nose for the end zone with 22 touchdowns last year. That's a guy who's a terrific red zone back as well, is Dylan Sampson.
Yeah, and Sampson reminds me more of John Kelly than he does Kamara. Kelly's the guy that started ahead of Kamara in college. And that's how Sean Payton won. That's how you got him in the 3rd round. And 2, that's how he fell in love with him. And Mace, I don't know about you, but I love watching prospects and then seeing the other guy and being like, well, actually, I like him better. And that's how Sean Payton found Alvin Kamara. So Simpson, that's what I call him, is an interesting back as well for day 2, day 3, somewhere in there.
There's a history of that. Usually it's with quarterbacks and receivers.
Mm-hmm.
You go to work out the quarterback and you find the receiver. That's the story of how the late Dwight Clark was found by the 49ers. Because they went to Clemson to work out Steve Fuller, who was a 1st-round pick of the Kansas City Chiefs in 1979. And Dwight Clark was the guy who was brought in to catch some passes. And the 49ers didn't end up drafting Steve Fuller. They decided to wait until the 3rd round to get their quarterback that year, some guy named Joe Montana. But they drafted Dwight Clark later on. And a couple of years later, Joe Montana, Dwight Clark had one of the most iconic passes in the history of the sport. So funny how that works sometimes.
Yeah, the catch, man. Yeah. The catch. It can work like that. He does mention LeQuint Allen. He mentioned Dylan Sampson as well.
RJ Harvey as well. Yeah. We've talked about RJ Harvey out of Central Florida because he was a guy that Daniel Jeremiah mentioned last month. And again, he's another, he is a smaller back.
Yeah, I worry about that with target size, Mace, of all right, these other backs are around 6 foot. Harvey's, I believe they list him at 5'8". So, is that true Joker type? And maybe because Darren Sproles was a Sean Payton back. And he's like 5'5".
Well, the funny thing on Dylan Sampson, Tennessee listed him at 5'11", but his combine measurement was 5'8".
Whoops.
Uh-oh.
Usually they give him like an inch, or maybe 2, but yeah, sometimes it's like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. You saw that, you're like, whoa.
Not at the combine.
You look at his college bio, it's like 5'11". You're like, oh, well, oh my.
I guess he's not 5'11". It wasn't at the combine. Well, I'll tell the story quickly. Andrew Hawkins put clay on the bottom of his feet, and then he taped his ankles so that he could be a little bit taller. And Hawk was, 5'8", something like that. So
yeah,
he spent some time in the CFL, and then spent some time with the Browns and Bengals.
Isn't there like a trick from the Brady Bunch a long time ago? Like you stretched out, like
that's why they make them do this before they measure.
Or what about the hand thing? Remember Kenny Pickett was trying to increase the size of his hands,
and didn't he do that somehow miraculously
to somehow get above the 9-inch threshold?
We get this sometimes, but we have to look at all these other backs in case one. You could get Omarion Hampton. You could still get, because he mentions ETN just in passing. But Trevor Etienne, not Travis, his brother, Trevor Etienne, who we saw at the Senior Bowl. He's a solid day 3 pick. I ever see him in second or third round mocks. Could be totally wrong, and someone takes him in the second, but Etienne's more like a 4th, 5th round guy.
Yeah.
So you're going to have options on day 3. So it's important to know the top guys, Omarion Hampton, etc. But it's also important to know these other backs in case Sampson does fall to day 3 or ETN does fall to day 3, Mace, because even though there's 31 draftable backs, according to Mel Kiper, there'll be runs. But if that runs in the 3rd, 4th round, that means there's going to be value.
Right. And there'll be multiple runs too. Like you say, there'll be runs. There'll be a day 2 run. There'll probably be a day 3 run. Like now, last year, remember, there was the day 3 run. And the Broncos kind of got the back end of the day 3 run. The early end of the day 3 run, of course, involved our guy, Bucky Irving.
Yeah.
That hurts you, doesn't it?
That stings, man.
Stings you a bit.
Well, how much did you and I talk about Bucky? Like Bucky caught all the passes. And it's more than, I say this about Terrence Ferguson, Mace. I said this earlier on Dover and Cecil. I'm like, it's not the Oregon thing. With some guys, it's just not. And if Terrence Ferguson was a Syracuse tight end, I'd be like, hey, that guy's pretty good. And Bucky Irving, if he was a Oklahoma running back, I'd say boomer sooner. And I'd say you should draft that guy. So playmakers making plays, man. That's what the Broncos need to find.
Well, Braylon Allen. It hasn't quite happened for Braylon Allen yet.
He's flashed though.
That was my number 1 guy in that range last year, but he had, he had some moments. I think he's going to be that hidden gem. I mean, it looks like the Jets are in teardown mode, but I think that they might be a little bit better than people think. The Jets have a direction now. I don't think they had a direction last year. I think they have a direction now. Very similar how the Broncos had a direction.
When Aaron Rodgers is your compass, I don't think that's a good direction.
Well, it's like if what is it when you put a magnet next to a compass, it starts spinning around? I think that was the Jets last year.
Okay, so you're calling Aaron Rodgers magnetic. I see. All right.
Well, a magnetic
polarizing
on a compass. Yes, that's probably a good way of putting it. Like, it's funny because someone had put this on my Twitter. Yeah, I'm still calling it Twitter. It's not whatever that name is. Someone says, "Hey, Mace Denver, you're a big history guy. Would you call Aaron Rodgers one of the 10 greatest to ever play the game, or even top 20? Well, I think objectively, you do have to say he's among the top 20 quarterbacks to play the game. I think that's fair. If we're talking players, I mean, certainly the numbers. I mean, he's got strong numbers, but if we're talking top 20 players, you're going to bring in running backs, you're going to bring in pass rushers. I wouldn't say top 20 players. Top 20 quarterbacks, I think you still have to say he is.
Sure. Yeah.
But I don't think top 10 quarterbacks, because I think I'm going to say, I'll just throw some names out. I'm going to say Joe Montana, Johnny Unitas, Sammy Baugh, Dan Marino, Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes right now, John Elway.
I think you're at 9.
Yeah, Brett Favre. I think Brett Favre comes in better than Aaron Rodgers. Yeah, I'm already at 9, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then Fran Tarkenton. There you go. It was pretty easy.
Yeah.
I'm going by the era they were in as well. Otto Graham. I got to 11 basically without even having to open a book or look at a stat. 11 that I feel good about that I would take over Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah.
So yeah, not top 10.
That's a channel, not top 10.
Yeah, and you know what? Actually, someone who already has a couple of MVPs, I think, is kind of sneaky into that. Lamar Jackson. Even though he doesn't have a Super Bowl yet. It's more than Super Bowls because I threw Dan Marino in there.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Marino was probably the purest passer we've ever seen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I got John Elway in there. I got Peyton Manning in there.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, some Broncos quarterbacks. We need some Broncos running backs to make some hay and make some noise. That's why I feel this picture's incomplete. You mentioned pieces of the puzzle, Mace. I'd like a couple, even if it's Dobbins and 2 in the draft. Even if it's not Dobbins and then 2 in the draft and an undrafted guy. A completely open competition in the room. That's what I would love to see. And maybe if you want the veteran guarantee on the box and J.K. Dobbins or whoever, that's fine. But I want a lot of competition there, Mace, because they got to be good there.
You want a lot of competition unless you just have the alpha out of this draft. There are 2 alphas. 2 alphas. Ashton Genty, Omarion Hampton. 2 guys that walk in and they're RB1 and that's it. And that led to something that came out from Mel Kiper Jr. during this conference call today, because he did mock Ashton Genty to the Raiders. But Mel has some self-awareness to his credit. And he did reflect on the fact that he has not been a take a running back high guy. He has been one who said, okay, there's the positional value. He said, look, I've got Ashton Genty 4th on my board, but I have not ordinarily advocated taking running back high. But if you're looking at it as a final piece of the puzzle, what he said, as a missing link, then you do it. Are the Raiders at a missing link point? Perhaps not.
Right.
So let's hear more from Mel Kiper Jr. on that, and then you and I can talk about this and ruminate on this a little bit.
If you're a team, the missing link to get you to the playoffs or get you over the hump, like Saquon was at Philadelphia, got him to a Super Bowl. If it's a missing link, you draft that guy high. I don't have a problem with that if it's the missing link. The argument with the Raiders is he the missing link with the Raiders? Okay, probably not. So, is Hampton the missing link in Denver? You could argue, hey, we got Bo Nix. Now you add Amari and Hampton. So if it's a missing link type of situation, fine.
I like it.
Okay. What would you sacrifice if you had to move up and get said missing link?
If it's Hampton, because Genty, my crazy answer is like, whatever. But if Hampton's close to Genty, which according to your text, you texted me that Kiper kind of alluded to that, like, hey, Hampton's not that far behind Ashton in terms of prospect grade.
In his mind, yes.
In his mind. My mind's a little different. I don't have a first-round grade on Hampton, but he's high too, which means he's a 1, whatever. Like, it's semantics. I just can't give up another 1. If you have to move in front of Dallas, I don't think you're drafting a running back at 20. If Hampton's gone and you think Hampton's going to be gone at 12, if Genty's already gone at 6, don't think you're taking a running back at 20. Even though I love Travion Henderson, I've called him the most Kamara-like of this class. I don't take him at 20, Mace. I move back, maybe like 28, but I don't take him at 20. I don't think he'll be there at 51.
I don't feel good about Henderson at 20. I'm not sure I feel good about Henderson even at 30. I think I feel better about him early too.
Move up like you did for Javonte, 51 to 35, something like that.
That feels like more the sweet spot for him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, if you could move back and collect an extra third rounder, so you could have 2 2s and 2 3s in the end, because you end up with Henderson and Judkins, and then your developmental tight end and a defensive lineman in round 3.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, I'll throw this by you. So if you trade down, so you're picking early in round 2, and you've picked up a round 3 pick as part of the deals that you've made. And let's say you end up with Henderson, Judkins, Terrence Ferguson, and Deion Walker.
Pretty damn good.
I'd be pretty happy with that. Or instead of Ferguson, it's Gunnar Helm or
right.
Harold Fannin or Mason Taylor.
And instead of Walker, maybe it's Jordan Phillips, the defensive tackle from Maryland, who we really like. The way this class is setting up, you've got flexibility within the position groups that you are interested in. That's tight end, running back, defensive tackle.
I feel like I've checked the boxes, and I've got my running back rotation. Then I've got both the guys I've needed. I got my joker running back. I've got my first and second down running back.
Mm-hmm.
I've got my D-line fortified. So either if I elect not to bring back JFM in 2026, I've got the guy that I'm going to plug in there. If I do bring back JFM, then hey, because I assume I'm going to extend Zach Allen. So then I'm feeling pretty good about what I've got up front rotation-wise. Either way, I'm able to bring someone in there. I'm coming at him with waves, and I've got the guy that I'm developing behind Evan Engram, who's ready to take the baton in a year or two, and actually maybe ready for some extensive snaps right away. So feeling depending on who you get. I think Mason Taylor is probably more ready for work immediately than, say, a Fannin or Arroyo or even a Ferguson. I think, those guys maybe you're bringing along a little more slowly, and that's fine too. But if you're not getting Hampton or Genty out of round 1, if that's what you end up with, I feel great about that. Even though you don't have a guy with a 5th-year option, if you get that out of the first 2 days, I think it's a home run.
Yeah. And you want your back to have that 5th-year option, because if he lasts that long, okay, you want to have that piece of the puzzle.
Well, that's the only thing you're missing with what I'm doing here, because I've moved down. I've kind of gone into like pick 35 here with Henderson. So that's the only thing I'm missing.
God's honest truth, and I hate to say this, but it's true, and it's not meant to make you feel good. You get 4 years out of running back, you'll be lucky. Maybe it's different because Sean Payton splits time. Look how long Kamara has played, and he doesn't have a 1,000-yard season.
Well, it's because he got to split time early, right? Especially early in his career. Got to split time with Mark Ingram. And even as his career has wound onward, they've kept him in that 250, 275 touch range, which that's actually not a lot over the course of a year.
No.
That's keeping him right around 15 to 17 touches a game. It's not a heavy workload here. you've got to get to 3 in the 16 game schedule. It was 320, and the 17 game schedule was 340. So you got to get north of 300 before you're talking about 20 touches a game, and that's just not an area in which Kamara has been present over the course of his career. He's been below that. They've kept it. They've kept it reasonable with him, and that's why you're still talking about Kamara being a viable back here going into year 9. He doesn't show signs of slowing down. I mean, barring something popping up here in the next couple of years, he ought to be contributing well into his 30s,
which is unusual.
Yeah,
in today's day and age.
But they've managed him exceptionally well, and they still do manage him very well. We'll see if that changes with Kellen Moore. Hopefully, that's where the fact that you still have Mickey Loomis in charge down there as the GM. I'm sure he'll tell Kellen Moore, look, if it's almost like a user's manual, like if you want to get a long life out of your ST20 whatever, you follow the instructions in the user's manual, right? That's what if you're Kellen Moore, you lean on that so you can continue to get plenty of use out of your Alvin Kamara
and make the march for Arch. But it's not black and gold today. It's orange and blue today. And Mace, we need folks' help on YouTube. How can they help us out?
Like,
comment,
share.
This is very animated. Subscribe.
And hit that notification bell
so that you never miss a vid. That's right. He's Andrew Mason. You follow him on all the socials at Mace Denver. I'm at C Salami saying OBT's BFD. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned. Stay frosty.